Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you are joining us from. On behalf of the Youth in Landscapes Initiative and the Global Landscapes Forum, we are so happy to have you here from wherever you are joining. My name is John Kamara. I am from Sierra Leone, and I'm happy to be here to hold the first Youth Daily Show of the GLF Climate Hybrid Conference. The Youth Daily Shows are short 30-minute sessions designed to share youth expertise and to inspire people all over the world with amazing young leaders driving change. Every day, people living on the front lines of climate crisis witness its worsening consequences. As climate impact escalates, more people will be forced to leave their homes in search for safety. When it comes to the relationship between forest, climate, and the migratory movement, there's limited research that has so far examined the impact of deforestation on disaster displacement, on human migration, especially under the pressure of climate crisis. Today, we're here to talk about climate migration and to explore the important steps that need to be taken in order to protect the affected people. Before inviting our amazing speakers on stage, we would like to share with you a video so we can hear stories of young people who embarked on a digital learning journey all about environmental advocacy organized by the GLF, Yale, and other youth organizations. In this video, they will talk about how the climate crisis has affected or will affect their lives.
Hello, my name is Saqib Imran Ali, and I'm from Dhaka, Bangladesh.
Hello, my name is Marissa, and I am from Australia.
Hello, World Changers. My name is Rashad Sanusi. I am from Benin.
I'm from Zambia, and I'm Felix Isililo. Behind me is Lake Tanganyika.
Peru is a country vulnerable to climate change.
In the past and even presently, the country has faced severe calamities such as flood, cyclone, drought, river bank erosion, and so on. This results in the rural people migrate towards the capital city of Dhaka and settle in slums.
You may have heard of the lengthy drought followed by mega bushfires that much of Australia faced at the end of 2019 and beginning of 2020. Australia is no stranger to drought and bushfires, but this one was of an unprecedented scale and most likely exacerbated by global warming. Approximately 18.6 million hectares, or 46 million acres, of land was burned, an area roughly the same size as Syria. This terrible natural disaster destroyed over 3,500 homes, displacing thousands of families. At least 34 people were killed, and countless local businesses and communities were decimated.
All coastal cities are facing rising sea level, but some will be soon hit harder than others, especially in West Africa. This has devastating consequences for our population, including flooding.
Has been affected with the sea rising, and behind me is one of the villages that was affected. And the place that I'm standing here was a lodge that was also affected. There are people that were migrated from the places where they were and lost billions and millions of kwachas of their places.
Of its territory, it's exposed to dangers. People whose livelihoods are affected are on the move. Thus, the climatic drivers of migration are becoming more important. Between 2008 and 2019, 686,000 people were forced to displace by natural disasters within the country. The migration of fishermen along the coast depended on the availability of marine resources. In Piura, farmers migrate to diversify their income during periods of drought. In Cusco, Huancavelica, and Puno, people migrate to work due to cold spells and frost, just to name a few examples.
We can advocate for governments, businesses, and individuals to reduce their carbon emissions and find more sustainable alternatives. Thanks so much for listening.
So now, what are some of the things that the community can do? What is their action? On my own opinion, I think one thing they need to know is to acknowledge that climate change is real. that climate change is one of the defining challenges at our age.
Addressing the link between climate change and mobility in policies, doing research on it, integrating mobility into adaptation plans, and including the most affected population in the solutions development, we can forcefully address this reality. All Peruvians have a migration background. Growing impacts of climate change will make this increase, and we have to take action.
Thank you to everyone that shared your story. Now, I am happy to welcome on stage Ole Tawei from Germany, a correspondent at Refuge and a Master of International Law and Human Rights student at the United Nations mandated University for Peace in San Jose, Costa Rica. Ole, do you want to say hi to our audience?
Absolutely. I'm super happy to be here. Hi.
Thank you. And Marine Ubaldo, a climate justice and environment advocate from the Philippines. She's also the Philippines country coordinator for UN COI 16 Glasgow. Marina, you're welcome on stage.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Together with the team today, we'll be exploring the relationship between the climate crisis and people leaving their homes behind to look for a better future. So welcome both. We are happy for you to join us today. Very excited. I would like to start by leaving some space for you to let us know how you are connected with the topic, both personally and also professionally. Maybe we could start with you, Marina, and then we'll come to you, Ole.
Yeah, so for me, I am very concerned about this topic personally because I have seen it in my own community how climate crises are actually the cause for people to migrate just because they don't have any other choice. So I have seen a lot of my peers going to another city to look for another job or another livelihood because there is no livelihood available for them in the community anymore, especially if they're coming from fisherman village or farmers village, for example. I am from a fisherman's community. My father is a fisherman, and because of climatic disasters, because of the effects of climate change, our fishes are migrating to deeper seas. And so it has been so difficult for our fishermen to catch them, and they need to go to the Pacific in order to catch them, which is more difficult for them because they don't have that much big boats to go to the Pacific to survive there and to get some fish. So a lot, actually, that is just one example, because if you're like a farmer and because of the climate crisis, we have like we don't really know what there has been so many changes in the weather that makes it unpredictable for now what crop to plant because there has been changes already. So those are some of the things that actually causing climate migration on top of being a victim of a typhoon, since a lot of the people in our community has been devastated of Super Typhoon Haiyan, the strongest typhoon ever recorded in human history. They didn't have almost all of us didn't have a shelter to live on, and because of lack of support from our government, they didn't have a choice but to go to another place to be a climate refugee because they don't have anywhere else to go. So yeah, this topic is very, very personal to me because I have witnessed that with my own eyes, how this affected so many people and how this actually changed the harmony and how we're doing in the community. Sorry, Jen, you're on mute.
Thank you so much, Marina. When you were speaking, I could see the passion, and I'm really sorry about the community over there in Philippines. and I'm praying that hopefully things will improve going forward. And there's really something that you said that really touched me in terms of, you said the people don't have a choice. They have to literally move. There's no fish to catch. They don't have other economic means to basically have a livelihood support. So I think that is really something that really touched me. Anyways, on that note, I'm gonna move to you, Ole, and maybe you could also share with us how you connect both personally and professionally with regards to this topic. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. And welcome to everyone watching. So I guess already on this question, I could probably talk for half an hour straight, but I try to cut it as short as possible. So I took part in an exchange program between young adults from Germany and from Kiribati. And then I could live in Kiribati for an entire year. And I got to know this amazing place. It is placed halfway between Australia and Hawaii. And when I call it amazing, it's not because of whatever paradise pictures might pop up in your head when you think about the South Pacific. Yeah, there have been amazing beaches, but that's not what I call it amazing for, but the people I got to know there. I learned the Kiribati language, I made many friends, I got to learn a lot about the country's culture and so on. And then I had to learn that climate change will probably render the entire nation uninhabitable within 30 to 40 years. And all my friends will have to migrate. And this is insane actually, because Kiribati is contributing to the world's greenhouse gas emissions to no more than, let's say, 0.00002%, so nothing actually. But they have to migrate. They suffer from it the most, or one of the countries suffering the most. So I think we all agree on that this is super unfair. Otherwise, you and I wouldn't be here in this session. But what I also wondered about in this situation is what happens to the people of Kiribati once the islands are rendered uninhabitable, when they have to migrate. What happens to the people? What happens to the language, to the culture, to the statehood of Kiribati? And then I tried to follow these questions throughout my bachelor and my master. And lately I got engaged with an amazing organization. It's called Refuge. And this is the planet's first legal think tank dedicated to climate migrants. And we might maybe have the chance to talk about this a little more later on, but that's maybe enough.
Well, thank you very much for that. Thank you both so much for opening up with us and sharing your story. Really appreciate it. Something that comes to my mind when we talk about climate migration is how humans have been moving for centuries already, because of environmental changes. Is climate migration really different from this? Maybe I'll have you, Ole. Will you like to take this question and maybe give us an overview of how migration due to environmental and climate crisis has changed in the last years? Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think that's a huge question, but I'll try to answer it. In order to do so, I would first like to talk about what climate migration actually is. So what are the people fleeing from? And I think we can say that climate change, it takes various forms, right? So there's floodings, there's changes in precipitation, there's droughts, and many other forms of climate change. And in many of its forms, climate change is threatening the most basic human rights. When I say most basic human rights, I'm saying like the right to life, for example, the right to food, to water, to health, to sanitation. People, as we heard from Marinette, for example, people cannot work anymore. And all of this, there's more human rights, there's more basic needs which are not fulfilled anymore, cannot be fulfilled anymore because of climate change. You can name them. Well, and I think we can group these threats, which I just talked about, in, well, two major groups, which are the sudden onset and the slow onset disasters. This is a technical term, obviously, but when I talk about sudden onset disasters, this might be a storm flood, for example. And well, if this happens, it might happen from one day to the other. And if you flee from that, you did not plan on that for long. You will just go anywhere where it's safe. And this is probably the closest place you know, might be the next village, it might be next city, for example. And this is mainly happening within country borders. And then there's the second type of migration patterns due to the threats of climate change, the slow onset disasters. And this might, for example, be because of droughts. If you are, for example, a farmer, and every year it gets harder and harder to make your living out of this because of drought, your seeds don't grow anymore. You will think about, okay, what do I do? Like, how do I make my living? How do I get enough food, for example? And then you come up with the idea, okay, we'll have to leave. Or it's not actually an idea, as Marina said, you're forced to do that. And you might go to the next city, for example, making your living in one of the stores, so you just don't continue being a farmer. Or you might as well think about, why not migrating to another place in another country where I'm more safe, where I can do what I did do before, being a farmer. And then you might cross borders. This is bringing some difficulties we might have the chance to talk about later on. But when we think about what has changed in the past decades, I think we have to talk about the frequency of this sudden onset as well as slow onset disasters. So this is also like the same argument happens when people say, yeah, but climate changed always. It always changed. Yeah, that is true, but it's never changed in this pace and made for human reasons. So yeah, we will have to deal with a great number of climate migrants in the future. When we talk about numbers, and this is the last point I want to make, it's quite frightening. There's, for example, right now there's 1% of the Earth's surface where you can barely live because it's just simply too hot. And in the next 50 years, this is going to increase to 20%. It's 20 times higher than before. And this also means that the number of climate migrants might increase. There's different estimates depending on who you ask, but the World Bank, for example, says it's 216 million, I think. And then there's others saying, okay, it's going to be more than 1 billion. 1 billion climate migrants within the next 50 to 100 years. And already today, it's when we talk about this internally displaced people, that's what the technical term is for people fleeing within their country borders. 3/4 of all internally displaced people are fleeing climate change. They are not fleeing war, but 3/4 of all of them are fleeing climate change already. So yeah, that's the main change, I think. It's a frequency, it's the amount of people fleeing from climate effects.
Thank you so much for that, Ole. You touched on really a lot of key and important issues, talking about frequency, talking about how livelihoods are being impacted, and of course, you making the point, of course, that and all of these different things that are happening all point back to the urgency that we really need to start preparing. It's something that it's almost looking like it's gonna be inevitable. And so it's good for us to start having these discussions, and which is why we're here today. And of course, you also mentioned something which also is really important about that it's not really their fault. Most of the communities and the people that are impacted, it's none of their fault. It's none of them their wish or making. So on that note, I'll move on to you, Marina. Marina, your country, the Philippines, is particularly vulnerable to severe typhoons like the Goni typhoon in 2020. How is this affecting people living there? And are there any steps being taken in order to prevent locals or even prevent severe damages?
Yeah, thank you for that question, John. In the Philippines, we experience an average of 20 typhoons per year. And personally, like my community is always been ravaged by typhoons every year. So growing up, I have been really used to it. I grew up with it. Basically, I could just say that. But because of Super Typhoon Haiyan, it was the first time that we actually was a that we actually experienced that kind of monstrous typhoon. And after Super Typhoon Haiyan, we experienced like there is a pattern of stronger typhoons, because before we could the strongest typhoon is category 3, but now we have category 4 and category 5, which is very very unusual. And um people are trying to rebuild. Our government is trying to rebuild schools, health centers, a lot of important infrastructures in our communities. But most importantly, those poor people are trying to rebuild their houses, their livelihood, from scratch. And then another typhoon would come and just wash away everything. So that is actually also one of the cause that people just go to other places that is not that vulnerable to the climate crisis, because I mean the climate crisis is anti-poor. It is making poor poorer. It is not really helping us, though you one would say that we are actually getting aid from different international organization and rich countries, but those aids are just for short term, for just for you to survive, but in the long run they are not actually sustainable. Even if people who are relocated tend to come back to their communities because there is no livelihood in the relocation center. So this is like a huge topic when you try to like relocate people, when you try to give them more safer place, but also you just don't give a house, but you also have to give like a holistic life, you know what I mean, to those people. Because um if you will just give them like an infrastructure, a house, then without any livelihood in it, and that relocations place is so far from civilization, there is no transportation, there is no water, there is no electricity, there's no other things around it because it's so isolated, then people would really go back to the community. The thing that happened actually in Tacloban was a lot of organization in our government actually gave like a livelihood. But I think there should be more assessment on that, because they give the same livelihood to people. So they give like a sari-sari store, if you know, it's like a retail small store in the Philippines that they could like start on, but then they give like sari-sari store to every houses. So there is no like customer anymore because everyone has it. So those are some of the things that maybe we should like revisit, and how we implement I mean not we, but like the government and the big organization, on how we implement these kinds of projects in the ground, because sometimes they just duplicate and sometimes they don't actually help communities get back to their feet. So um I echo what Ollie has said earlier, that um the climate crisis it is actually also a question of our human rights. Whenever there is climate disaster, we lose our right to a safe environment. As the climate crisis continues, we are demanding for our rights to have a safe environment, and those basic rights are being deprived to people who are on the vulnerable communities. Like after Typhoon Haiyan, we didn't have any shelter to live on, and we were isolated for 3 to 5 days. We didn't have food or water to eat and drink, and those are depriving us of our right for food, for water, for shelter, and even for education. A lot of children drop from school because there's no school anymore, and they have to help their families. They have to go. Girls were being sent out to big cities to work as maid and sales ladies, and those actually depriving them of their right to education. And there are so many more we're being deprived of our children, and youth are being deprived of our right to development, to survival, to participation in decision making processes, the right to protest and the right to actually exercise your rights, because sometimes they're privileged already to exercise your rights, even though it is so basic that you're entitled to it, just because the circumstances is not really allowing it. So yeah, maybe this is also one thing that our friends from first world countries could learn from, is that all of these privileges and I mean things that they enjoy right now are already like luxury. Even just the very basic one are already luxury for other people in the vulnerable communities.
Thank you for that, Marina. I think one of the key things that you really mentioned was just how crisis, especially crisis like, for example, climate change, really undermines stability in some of these communities, undermines people's livelihood, and just really basically undermines people's dignity, And as somebody who's gone or who's been through a civil war in Sierra Leone, I can definitely relate to some of the points that you've raised today. On that note, I'll move to you, Ole. Ole, reflecting on what Marina has shared about the situation in the Philippines, it makes me wonder whether people who are displaced by environmental events can claim asylum or protection in other countries. In other words, are climate refugees recognized and incorporated into legal systems?
You want a short answer? No, they are not. And if you want me to put it even more provoking, we could say there are no climate refugees, at least when we talk in legal terms. There are no climate refugees because the definition of the term refugee stems from the UN Refugee Convention. It's from 1951. And I mean, if we all feel that there isn't enough being done on climate change today, let's better not talk about 1951, right? So what we have to know about this Refugee Convention is that it establishes a variety of rights for those who cross an international border when they are fleeing and then seeking help in a country which isn't their own, where they originated from. And all countries in the world, they will have to grant refugees the right to non-discrimination, the right to work and housing, among others, right? But to be recognized as a refugee, you have to fit in a certain definition, and the asylum seeker must demonstrate a well-founded fear, this is a quote, right? A well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. But then people fleeing the consequences of climate change, they simply do not fall under this definition. And now you could say, well, then let's just adjust the definition, right? I mean, it's clearly outdated. And I would agree on that. Yeah, we have to do that. But there are a number of countries in the world that are afraid of the consequences for them when they change this definition, and they resist on it. Because, well, what I said earlier, let's remember, in the next 50 to 100 years, there's going to be 200 million to 1 billion people that are expected to flee from climate change or the impacts of climate change. And then they would have to be granted protection in case of a definition change, right? So this is the reason why bigger countries, industrialized countries, if you want to call them that way, they resist on changing that definition. And this is actually where my organization, which I talked about earlier, Earth Refuge, comes into place, because we're trying to think about how can we reinterpret existing laws, because probably some countries won't agree on making new rules or new laws. How can we reinterpret existing law in a way that grants protection for those fleeing from climate change?
Thank you so much for that. So how can we come together to really work together to solve something that is affecting not only poor communities, but that's also equally going to affect even the rich ones, the rich countries? I think that is really the point I would love to emphasize. How can we all come together and recognize climate refugees and act now and know that this is something that is happening? It's already happening. Thank you so much for that, Oli. So on that last question, if we can try to keep it brief, as we are almost on top of the 30-minute time that we have, I just want to ask, what are the systemic changes or new approaches needed in order to provide an immediate clear direction to halting the climate crisis and so supporting people's right for a sustainable, resilient, and safe home? Marina, are you happy to start us off?
Yeah, that is really a big question. Well, first I think is we have to go to the communities. That whenever we do programs and projects that actually involves and affects the communities, it is really, really important to get consultation and the ideas of the communities. We should not just go there telling them of what to do, but actually getting the ideas that they have. Because if you want to make these communities safer, it is them that you should talk to, because they know what are the vulnerabilities that are already in place in the communities, and what are the solutions what are the solutions that they can think of to solve all that vulnerabilities and the harms, the hazards, the risks that are in the communities. And because I myself, I've been in the communities and have been so tired of having these big organizations and our government telling us of what to do, because that is what will solve the problems in the community. When we visit other remote communities in the Philippines, we were so surprised that there are so many initiatives already on the ground that are happening for them to survive and mitigate and adapt the climate crisis. And these initiatives, they did it on their own. And what we can do, people in big organizations or people in power can do, is just to really support these initiatives on the ground, the existing initiatives on the ground. And for your question, how to what we can still do to make sure that these communities are safe, that they will not face the same vulnerability and the same destruction, I think we can start from there to really make people involved in all the decision-making processes in all its levels. Because whenever we talk about those peoples in the grassroots, we just don't talk on behalf of them. We talk with them. We work for and with them and by them, because it is so important. We should not exclude ourselves thinking that we know everything, but the reality is we don't. So I think there is still a huge gap, and there is so much still to work on that aspect of just making it inclusive, because we have so many great ideas in mind and on how to implement such projects and to how to ensure the communities are safe. But I always ask, are those projects also were they determined by the community, or you're just there telling them that this is the project and this should solve your problem? It is always like getting people involved in every process along the way. So I think we should start from there, really making it inclusive and accessible for people, not just for people in power, but also for people in the grassroots. Because like if we will not involve them, then I don't think like it is really for the community.
Thank you so much for that. 3 words: empower, include people, and of course, make it accessible. Make climate aid or whatever you can accessible to communities that are in need of it. Thank you. Ole, thank you. Yeah, Ole, do you have any other thing that you want to add probably? Do you have anything else you want to add?
I think that Marinette actually said the most important thing on it. Like, yeah, we have to listen to those who are affected. It doesn't make any sense to come up with solutions, if you want to put it that way, that don't help anyone because you didn't listen to those who are affected actually. But I know we're running out of time, but I just want to say that I think it's super important to tackle the climate crisis on 2 levels. And I know it's happening already, but I think we should focus on it more, that we do make progress on climate mitigation, but we also actually talk about climate adaptation. Because when I think about Kiribati, where the climate is reacting quite sluggishly, if you want to say it that way. So even if we stop polluting the environment like today, if after the COP, no country in the world is emitting any carbon dioxide anymore, probably it's still too late for example, Kiribati. And we have to think about how can we deal with the impacts that have happened already. And I actually I find it quite unacceptable that there's countries in the global south, like for example the Philippines, Marinelle mentioned that, or Kiribati, for example, and they might have to incur debts now to deal with the impacts of climate change. And they incur debts from the global north. And this is insane, actually. I mean, we talked about this already. This is happening because of what the global north was doing mainly. And now the global south is making debts. So I think what we really have to focus on and talk about more is loss and damage. And this is something which I hope is happening right now in the COP26.
Thank you so much, both of you. We are at the end of the Youth Daily Show, and I would love to thank our amazing speakers, and above all of you from the audience. Thanks for joining. Thanks to you, Marine, and thanks, Ole, for sharing your knowledge and experiences with all of us. You both made it clear that the climate crisis knows no borders, and neither should we, especially when it comes to solidarity, equity, dignity, and a safe home for everyone. Let us continue this important conversation on social media and across all other spaces where we discuss and act about the climate crisis. This was the first episode of the JLF Climate Youth Daily Show series. Tune in back tomorrow at 1:30 to 2 p.m. GMT to hear from amazing young chefs about the linkages between our diet and the climate crisis. Also, don't forget to join GLF Act, Unveiling the Restoration Alliance, today at 15:30 to 15:50 GMT, 1 hour, 30 minutes from now to hear from GLF actors on the ground. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. Thank you.